Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our April 26th LCAAC meeting. I'm calling us to order here at 6:31. And we're going to go ahead and begin with roll call. Brian.
I'm here.
Excellent. Anne.
Present.
Great. Kevin. No Kevin yet. Devanshi. No Devanshi. Nishi?
Here.
Excellent. Yen? No Yen yet. Divya? Nope. Okay. Calvin? Okay. Anna?
Here.
Great. Twisha?
Here.
Excellent. Marinelle? Marinelle is, okay, great. Oh, okay. All right. Crystal?
Here.
Excellent. Gabriella? No? Okay. Larona? Okay. Michael?
Present.
Ivy?
Here.
Great. Okay. And then our non-voting members, Steve?
Here.
Letty?
Here.
Trustee Jones?
Here.
Great. I don't see Trustee Campbell and then I don't see anyone from the business office, but Letty, I don't think that there will be anything needed. I think we've taken care of what we need to present for you tonight, so that's fine. And then as usual, help our secretary Michael out if someone comes or we need to, that would be the only logistical stuff would go in the chat. And then Michael, since we're nearing the end of the year here and we've had enough meetings, I'm going to ask you to look through the last attendances because I think we'll need to submit, the district is probably going to need to add on the agenda, picking up not only the couple of vacancies that we definitely have verified, but then also people who haven't attended, right? Those multiple meetings per our bylaws.
Okay.
So we'll have that then for our, then we can get that to the board as well. All right, excellent. So we're going to move on then. Letty, is there any public comment for this evening?
No, we checked and there's no public comment for this evening.
All right, we are moving along. So what we did for this evening, since most of our kind of hot areas were centered around a couple different things, one of them being mental health, and then that'll bleed a little bit into the multi-tiered systems of supports. So that's kind of the area of information that we brought back tonight, which we think will help us finalize our LCAP for this upcoming year. So I included the very comprehensive presentation that Mr. Bailey already did so that he doesn't have to do it again, as much as he loves doing that presentation, I'm sure. So that's linked in your agenda. So hopefully you were able to review that. And of course, he's here so he can help us with any questions that you have as we're having that conversation. Letty, did you see now, because we're gonna move on then to just do a quick presentation from Jen up, and then we're gonna have Greg do a little bit more on kind of extension from that. I'm not sure if there's a waiting room in Google Meets.
No, I don't see it, and I don't
Okay.
I don't see anyone waiting. And most
Okay,
people have been
so
commenting.
I'll check in, email them again, but then we could just have Greg go first. But Twish, I see you raised your hand.
I think we forgot to approve the minutes.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, and I do this a lot in meetings, speeding right through. So the only amendment that I had made to Michael's minutes, if you haven't opened those, is just adding one bullet at the end, which were from my notes, the things that we definitely we're going to have further consideration on. So 1.7, Michael had already listed the 2.5, 3.2 and 4.6, and then 3.1 would be like in the future, but it isn't like needs to get crammed in tonight since we talked about that. And so now if anyone wanted to make any amendments or there were any corrections that needed to be made for attendance, that's been something, if you got in even a minute late and Michael was right on attendance, now would be the time to correct that if needed. So take a look and make sure that's accurate. But otherwise,
While
yep.
you're doing that, I would also say that I have a hard cutoff at 8. I shared the notes with Victoria and Leticia in case I need to go, but wedding planning doesn't wait for anybody. So,
Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful.
oh, thank you.
Yay. Okay, all right. So I'm not seeing anyone who needed some amendments, but Divya is noting, since she just popped in, that she'll get added on to the attendees for this evening. But now would be the time to change. Oops, and Divya, I think her name is misspelled in these in the minutes from the 12th. Michael, can you look in the chat now and then just copy that over? And then Lorona just arrived as well. Okay, so I'm not seeing any amendments. Is there any objection to approving the minutes from April 12th as they are, with just a couple, the spelling and the amendment? Okay, all right, so seeing none, you have approved that, and thank you, Twisha, for having me go back to that. And so Letty, if Jenep is still not here, then, so what we've asked Greg to do so that he doesn't have to do the same presentation is actually take us through a little bit about what our existing counseling staff does now. And there's been some conversation about academic counseling versus socio-emotional counseling. So if you could talk a little bit about the backgrounds that counselors can currently have, and how that works. And then we did previously in Greg's department, and Greg, I don't know if this was before your time in your current role, but we did used to have a social worker position that was in your department and would have reported to you. But if you, whatever history you have there, and what a social worker might do as compared to an academic counselor, as compared to a counselor that works with socio-emotional needs.
And I think as Greg, as you're getting started, I also kind of want to give the context from also staff perspective. And you all have been very involved in our committee here, but also have seen just our community, the community survey, just wanting to know more about mental health support for students. I know Greg has been working tirelessly, just really trying to get just kind of his arms around this, because, you know, we are going to be entering just a whole new year next year. And so I think with that context, thinking about what the survey results have also told us, what the community has said, Greg's been working on and can clarify some of the work. And I think certainly responding to our board as a whole has really shown the interest and given direction to staff to really look at how to support more. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Greg.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, our counselors at our school sites are school counselors with a PPS credential. A lot of times in their programs, they do get some mental health training along with the academic support, but most of their counseling at school will be for academic and school related issues. Our elementary counselors are our newest counselors on board. And you either have them 3 days a week or 2 days a week at our elementary sites. Sometimes they will do grade level push-ins. Some of them will use second step as some of the curriculum. They do mindfulness, making good choices, and it kind of varies, but all of our elementary site counselors are going into the classrooms and doing either grade level presentations or class level presentations. And as we get more towards the junior high and high school, because of the sheer number of students, it's a little bit more difficult to do grade level or class topics to the whole school. But they are all PPS credentialed counselors that will do some, of course, if a student's in crisis. I don't think I've ever had a counselor turn away a student. But we try not to get in the habit of our counselors doing ongoing therapy. That would be more like an MFT or even an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker who can also do therapy. So I think the second part to your question, Victoria, is I will expand on the LCSWs and what they can do. But all of our other counselors have a PPS credential. We also have some counseling interns that are through the city of Fremont, and they are trying to get their MFT licenses. So they must conduct so many hours of experience before they are licensed MFT. We are looking to expand that. We had a meeting actually with Cal State East Bay today, as a matter of fact, to see if we could get some more interns possibly next year along with that. And we have an internal person in the district office who can supervise that, which is very exciting for us. And when we did that job description a few years ago, we wanted to make sure that that was in there. So if we wanted to bring our own intern program, there wouldn't be any cost to us because that position's already paid for out of the district. So really, the counselors, it ranges from what they do on a daily basis. I know their ratios are something that has been brought up quite a bit, and in fairness to them, they do have some big caseloads. So a lot of the work that they can be doing, they just can't because of the sheer number of the student populations at their sites. I want to talk about 3 categories where, if we were looking at pure PPS credentialed counselors, and once again, their main focus is academic counseling, they will do a student in crisis, but not an ongoing therapy. To make all of our elementaries have a full time, that's an additional 14 PPS credentialed counselors. And then if you added 1 more to each secondary level, that's another 11 for a total of 25. The second bucket would be, we have to make a decision out of the district is, do we want to have MFTs or LCSWs on our district? Most districts who have will go with the licensed clinical social workers because it's a broader topic of what they can do. They can do therapy, and they could do ongoing therapy if you choose to do so at your district. But they could also do case management. They could also be that key component to the community to link up resources. They could be part of the our cost teams, MTSS. So that would be, I would prefer the LCSW route if we go to that route. And then the third one we were just talking about, that Fremont Police Department has their own MET team, which will respond to a crisis. A lot of times it's a 5150 holds. That's not only for students, but that's for adults. That's for anybody in our community. That's right now staffed by a sergeant, 3 officers, and a crisis, they call it a crisis intervention that they share with human resources. So I think we need to explore what would it look like if we had our own MET team. Of course, I don't think they'll be our employees, but maybe we could contract out with a MET team where if a student's in crisis, we will always have a MET team to go to that site, because the problem with the citywide one, they already might be at a call with an adult in our community or a senior citizen in our community. So those are things that I think we need to discuss as a district moving forward, is what kind of angle do we want to go in? I could tell you my feelings. I could probably give you pros and cons to all 3. It's just a decision what we want to do moving forward. I would also say, when you look at our ratios with our counselors, even if we are fortunate enough, and I haven't talked about money yet, nor is that my call here, but trying to, hire 25 counselors, that could be very exciting, but also it could create some challenges for us. Is there enough out there? Same thing with LCSWs. How many as a district would we want to hire? Where would they be placed at? Is it by attendance area? Is it every 3 schools share? That would be something that would have to be discussed at a much larger level. And then the MET team, do we want to explore that? No other districts have the MET team concept. I don't know if other districts will be moving in that area, but it is an intriguing thought for us of what that might look like for FUSD, for our staff and our student community. So I'm sorry, Victoria, I didn't come up with the PowerPoint or any presentations, but those are just kind of some thoughts. And I think it really depends on what direction we want to move in as a district, because there is some planning. And then once we hire, if we get to hire somebody, we really need to figure out exactly what entails with that position. Because if we don't have that, I don't think we're going to solve any issue that we might be trying to solve.
Thank you so much, Greg. I just want to say I've seen so many of your lovely PowerPoints and presentations. You have a total pass from me. So I know that you've done a lot of work in this area. So yeah, I think that helps. And I do want to let people ask questions too as needed. This is exactly what we were looking for when Letty and I met to talk about it. So thank you so much. And really a lot of interesting things too that you're bringing forward. So let me take a couple questions. And I think Greg accurately put, he has, in his position, which we've talked about a little bit, we can take some weight too with the recommendations that Greg is making, because he has a lot of intersectionality in that department. So that's really useful for us. Okay, did you want to say anything else, Greg, before I start with questions?
Yeah, I forgot to mention, years ago, we did have a social worker. That position was eliminated, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago, maybe even longer than that. That position was really focused on our foster youth and McKinney-Ventos. Just a couple of years ago, we brought back the youth mentor position, which is still working with our McKinney-Vento and our foster youth. It is not a social worker, though. So that person does not have to have the social worker credential for that position. I just wanted to clarify on that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Michael.
Yes, you said that there were 3 different possible directions. Could you just summarize them really quickly for the notes? Like bullet point version?
Yeah, I think the first option would be our regular school counselors who hold PPS credentials. If we were to add one for elementaries to make them full-time, that's 14. And then 11 at the secondary level, that would be a total of 25. Option 2 do we want to go in the route of MFT or LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker who can do therapy and ongoing therapy. And I think that number would have to be determined by how much money we're talking about, to be honest with you. And the third option would be, do we want to explore an FUSD to have our own mobile MET team, which will respond to students in immediate crisis, either to injure themselves or others? Do we want to explore that? And I think the makeup of that, I think there's a lot of play on what that might look like. Right now, the MET team for Fremont Police Department has 3 officers and a crisis response individual, but those officers are not all on at the same time. They're kind of spread out throughout the day. So it might only be one person on any given time of who's on that MET team that's a Fremont police officer.
And what does MET stand for?
A mobile evaluation team.
Thank you so much, Greg. Ivy.
Thank you. Hi, Greg. I remember our district has, with the city, don't we have like Healthy Star program or something?
Yeah,
is that what we're talking about here?
It's real similar to the Healthy Start. So yes, we still have Healthy Start that will give us a case manager. It's very limited on the scope of that, just because of the location and the clientele. It's not district wide, if that makes sense.
It's right. The Healthy Start program is site-based.
Correct.
They use discretionary fund.
Yeah, correct.
So in addition to that, we're considering probably having the MFTs or LCSWs as an option.
I'm going to shoot for the pie in the sky. I would like 25 counselors and about 10 licensed social workers myself. But,
yeah, so Greg is he's not saying it's multiple choice, right? It could be select all, Greg, but he's giving us options, and then the committee will make the recommendation. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be all, none, a combination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think it would be helpful if we know how Healthy Start is working also. How is that helping? Does every site need to have a counselor, or is Healthy Start program enough on its own? Yeah, that's my question.
I think the sites who have them, and I think we have about 11 this year, 10 or 11, mm-hmm. They think it's very valuable. This is kind of a weird year because all of our referrals are quite a bit down because of the pandemic, just because we're not seeing the students on a daily basis. So the referrals are down, and that's not just FUSC, that's countywide. we're seeing that. One of the drawbacks to an intern is that they're limited on the number of students they could have on their caseload. So that is a severe limitation when it's only 10 students. And some of these students are on it for maybe a year or two. So they're taking up a spot, if you call it a spot or a seat for that. So there is some limitations to the interns. They're very valuable, but there are some limitations to it. And two, as a school site, you might get you're going to get a new intern every year. So building that school community where that social worker or MFT is really part of the school culture, I think that is lost because they're there for a year and then we get a new person.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Anna.
I have a question. How many emergency incidences do we have in our schools on a yearly basis, knowing that this year is and the end of last year is kind of unusual? Because you mentioned that, an emergency response team, but, how often is that needed? And I know that it does happen, but how often do our schools need that?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I believe the last time we were in session, I think we had 27 5150s or 23. But that does not mean that we only had 27 cases. That just means that 27 students were placed on the 5150 hold. There's many steps before they get to that place. We do have numbers from our counselors from a few years ago. And I could share that with Ms. Salinas, that might be able to, or Victoria, and maybe that could be shared with the committee. I don't have those memorized, but it was quite alarming because of the number of incidents that our counselors really got involved and solved it before it got to that final 5150 stage.
Okay, I just wanted to make a really informed decision based on data. Thank you.
The data we do have right now is Care Solace. Care Solace is brand new to us. We brought it in, I believe, in January or February. And we're seeing a lot of community inquiries with that, quite a bit. And that will break it down by the reasons why. Either it could be phobia, drugs, alcohol. It's a whole breakdown. We get a dashboard and we're seeing thousands of inquiries right now. So we are seeing an entrance in our community to receive more mental health support.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Brian?
I'm sure you'll get to this, but are we going to see the numbers for what it would cost for 25 brand new counselors in our schools and so on? That's exciting to hear.
Yeah, it's exciting to say out loud, right? It doesn't mean a lot when you said it. So I put in some of those types of numbers in the spreadsheet, but also we do have a couple things. We're going to finalize our LCAAC. We can't pay for everything out of LCAAC, which are those ongoing, but we also can then take some, maybe the spillover and some things that we want to invest even more in over the next couple years. And that might comprise our recommendation utilizing the expanded learning opportunities grant money. So we might be able to do some additional work that we might not be able to commit to forever, but at least for a couple years working through the pandemic. And then let's talk a little bit more about how we're on LCAAC. We can really only look at things that differentiate themselves to assist unduplicated students. But that doesn't mean all students aren't struggling right in this pandemic. So that's where we might not be able to target some sites because of their low unduplicated percentage, but those could be our recommendations for the ELOC. All right. So thank you, Greg. And we'll definitely come back to you when we're trying to make our recommendations here on the funds. But Letty, could you go ahead and check then if we have Alvin and Kenny there? They messaged me that they were in the waiting room, but I don't now.
I think they've joined by.
Oh, that maybe. Yes, I don't see anyone in the waiting room.
No, because
hey, all, can you hear me?
Oh, okay, Alvin. Yes, there you are.
Yeah, this is Alvin. So Kenneth and I were actually on the meets at 6:30. But when we hit the link, it says that we have to ask to join. So right now on our screen, it just says asking to join. You'll join the call when someone lets you in.
Okay.
So we're not sure what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me look. And it looks like Divya also raised her hand too, and I can work on that while she asks her question.
Okay, excellent. Divya.
Yeah, I raised my hand, and since my number wasn't coming, I was
No,
worried
you're good.
if it was seen or not. So I have a few questions for Greg. Yeah, of course, some of those questions were already covered by Anna. I wanted to also have the historical information, which will really be useful for us to make the decision. At the same time, it also helps us to identify which schools and which areas need more help, where, what kind of counselors or what kind of MSPs we need, etc. I also think that if I mean per school, if we are looking for one MFP and one counselor, again, I'm not sure of the terms. I'm just trying to put my thoughts forward. If we are looking for like two people, maybe the MFT could be full time and the counselors could be shared based on the numbers of the previous records and also the ongoing things too. Of course, due to COVID, things might be different. The numbers might be different too. But those numbers would really help us in identifying the need of each of those areas, at the same time identifying what kind of counselors, how senior we need to allocate to those schools, and also for the struggling students based on their diversity too, right? Like based on how many foster students are there in that area, how many kids are suffering from maybe drug abuse or whatever. We will be able to provide more support to them. And that was my first question. My second question is about the allocation in itself. Right now, we are thinking of allocating these resources to the schools because we have some leftover funds, and also that some of the schools are struggling. But once we assign these resources to those schools and areas, is it going to be that way going forward too, or are we going to come back and make a decision later again? I'm done.
Sure. Okay, let me try to answer the first question first. So I don't want us to get too bogged down on we're going to do this portion to this school versus that school. I think what we would say is we would want to recommend that all schools get this, or the top half of the schools with high unduplicated students will get this, and then we could recommend that ELOG is utilized to cover some additional portion. We'll be a little bit more conceptual rather than those nitty gritty, because I think that could take many hours. But yes, I think that the recommendations we can offer, Divya, to what you're saying is we really want to target schools who, whether it's even 4 schools that these are the elementary schools, right, we know that are the highest need, or we really want to, any smaller threshold of students that are unduplicated, it means we need them at these schools, right? And so we're fortunate to have Brian here from Glenmore, because if you're at a school that's like, I just missed the cutoff, so that means I don't get anything, right? And so we're fortunate now to kind of have both of these monies that we might be able to tap into. So not to get too into the nitty gritty, although I would love to do that with you offline. But then secondly, we aren't spending unspent money right now. That was something that we had done previously. This is both looking forward. So first, we are budgeting for next school year, the 21-22 school year. That's one portion. And those are considered more ongoing commitments because it's part of a multi-year LCAAC plan. The other portion is still forward-looking. It needs to be approved by June 1st by the school board, and we're a committee that's giving recommendations to the board, who, like always, will give their final say. But those are, while you can use them for a couple years, we wouldn't say that they're truly ongoing forever in that sense. So we would use it as kind of a boost kind of an infusion of services, maybe for a couple years to carry students through the pandemic a little bit. I hope I answered most of it. Letty, could I have you chime in a little bit, and then you can tell us if we're answering?
No, we're definitely on the right track, and I think Mr. Bailey's being very modest. He's done a lot of thinking around this, and you know, as the LCAAC is a recommending body to the board, you know, what we ask and what I ask of Mr. Bailey and staff is that they really hear from you all as the stakeholders that have looked at the data and given us some direction. And then Mr. Bailey really starts to put together some plans that then go before the board. And then the board sees, oh, okay, I can see how this can fit, because they will also have input, because we will do the public hearing in early June and then the final. And so, because it will change a bit more with when the board gives us their input. But I think what we also want to hear tonight is, you know, I think you were right on target, Victoria, where you're saying, let's target the unduplicated, or do we want to do partial, or do we want to substantiate early, the early learning or early grades? All of that gives some more information to Mr. Bailey and to staff as we start to put the plan together. And then you all will see a draft of it as well. And that's why tonight is so important, and it is moving forward. Later on, I'll speak a little bit about the expanded learning funds, which is exactly, I like that word, it's an infusion. The state recognizes that we're going to come back to just a new reality, and we are going to need these funds to do an extra push on professional development, or an extra push on infusion of support for students and for our principals and the community, but it's not ongoing. And so yeah, that's, and I see that our two students have also joined us, so.
Excellent. All right, so thank you, Letty, for that additional portion. And then Divya, of course, when we get back to, we'll keep going through some clarifications, because we want the committee to understand what we're recommending. Not only the items we're recommending, but also really the bigger picture, right, of the structure for the district that we are recommending. So with that, we have Alvin and Kenny here from Gen Up. Our students have been amazing over the last couple years, really, in advocating for mental health services. And so I'm going to, I believe you can share screen, but if not, I know I can. But I think if I can, that means all participants can. So Letty's saying yes. Okay, great. So Alvin, if you want to go ahead and share and go through, but you're on.
Okay, and I just want to apologize for the confusion. We figured it out. It's because we weren't added onto the original calendar invite. So because of security, unless we switch to our FUSD student accounts, it wouldn't let us in. So sorry about that, but Kenneth and I were able to figure it out. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started.
I just want to say it takes a teenager to actually troubleshoot all of that without assistance.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I hope this is working. Can everyone see my screen? Oh, I can't.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Okay, yeah. Hi all, my name's Alvin. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a current senior at Mission San Jose. I'm going to pass it over to Kenny to introduce himself real quick.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kenny. I'm also a senior at Washington High School.
And we're excited here today to present some of our mental health recommendations that we shared at a forum back in January, where a lot of our major district stakeholders were there, including our superintendent, a lot of our board members that are here today as well, Mrs. Rebecca Carrera, our PTA reps, our ASB elected student officer reps, etc. So we brought a lot of stakeholders together, and a lot of those efforts culminated back last summer when a lot of our 5 individual high schools, ASBs actually coordinated with different Gen Up Fremont folks to organize these mental health town halls and student support circles. So we have a bit of mental health data to back up our recommendations here, but we really want to jump in today to focus on our 2 main things, which are the recommendations and then the 3 aspects of MTSS. So I'm going to pass it over to Kenneth to take it away on this.
All right, yeah, thank you. So many of you might have recently heard the term MTSS, since we've been talking about it a lot at a lot of our different mental health centered talks. And so basically MTSS stands for multi-tiered systems of support, and it's a model that's been adopted by the California Department of Education. And so as you can see, it focuses on 3 core areas, and those are academic, behavioral, and social emotional learning with a whole child approach. And so at its core, MTSS provides a set of systems, structures, and practices to build a positive, equitable, and inclusive learning environment for each student. However, we must be very intentional about educational equity and cultural consideration and take the time with our most vulnerable students to make sure that they have equitable and inclusive access to education. And so this framework can be truly transformative as it challenges us to change the ways in which we worked in and outside of the classroom. And it can be extremely impactful when we adopt initiatives, systems, and supports, such as universal design for learning, culturally, linguistic, and relevant instruction, as well as a real focus and investment on Tier 2 interventions, such as dyslexia interventions, that not only help to prevent reading difficulties, but also support students' self-esteem and confidence.
So due to time, we're going to focus on the other main 2 aspects of MTSS that we wanted to present on today, which were the social emotional aspects, as well as the behavioral aspects of MTSS, since we know some elementary school sites are already implementing academic MTSS. So Kenneth, why don't you take it away on the behavioral MTSS?
Yeah, for sure. So when we're looking at behavioral MTSS, when we think about behavior within an MTSS model, it requires a culture shift from punitive practices to positive and supportive practices. And so this requires a shift from the person in authority, which is usually a teacher or school administrator, presenting a list of rules on what a student cannot do, and instead focusing on collaborating with the school community, including students, to build expectations for how we should all interact with one another. And so some of these Tier 1 systems of support include school-wide positive expectations, as well as classroom-specific expectations set by teachers and within each specific classroom. And so these expectations should be community-created and site-specific. And so this is something many schools do not currently have. And so Tier 1 would also include other support for all students, include active roles for all staff on campus to build positive relationships with all students on campus, and not just the students assigned to them, so like counselors or teachers as examples. And also establishing and maintaining healthy learning environments, which includes ongoing mental health support, adequate break and play times, access to healthy meals for all students, mindfulness practices, and other stress reduction techniques. And so Tier 2 consists of support provided to small groups of students, which can include a system called check-in, check-out, where a student chooses an adult that is not their teacher to check in with them every morning and check out every afternoon as a way to be sure that the child starts and ends their day with a positive interaction with a trusted adult. And for Tier 3 is any individualized support, which may include a support plan for a student and staff, as well as increased collaboration with other agencies to be sure that the needs of children are being met. And so students may be able to move through higher tiers of support as in any ways that the school may see fit. And so this would require teacher referral or student input and stuff like that. And so as we develop our behavioral interventions, we also want to emphasize the need for trauma-informed framework in our teaching and mental health practices. And so these practices are designed to transform our schools in a way that prevents students from being traumatized or re-traumatized in schooling and counseling, and to support students who have experienced extraordinary trauma and interrupted learning in integrating into the school community and developing agency. And so there's just a lot of information here and some questions to consider. And so you can take a look at that. All right, so now we'll move on to social emotional learning and social emotional MTSS. And so social emotional learning is also another term that's been talked about a lot in our mental health discussions. And so what that is basically a system in which students are taught skills that help them navigate social situations and the emotional well-being of themselves and others. And so social emotional learning covers a wide range of topics such as identifying strong emotions, coping with and managing stress, conflict management and resolution, a growth mindset, mindfulness, etc. And so the 5 key overarching topics covered in social emotional learning, are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so these skills are foundational to all student learning because a student under mental duress cannot learn effectively. And so a student without the tools to vocalize their needs will not be able to advocate for themselves. Student behavior is inherently linked to how they are feeling. And so if a student is able to identify how they are feeling, communicate their needs to a support system, and cope with their emotions in a healthy and productive manner, we can reduce the potential of students being deemed disruptive or defaulting to discipline. And so here's just some more information about some other restorative practices that we can take. And so here are just some examples. And so tier 1 circles are meant for community building, and this tier engages all students within a school site. And so tier 1 focuses on using social and emotional skills and classroom circles to build relationships, create shared values and guidelines, and promote restorative conversations. Tier 2 circles are used for intervention and repair within like smaller groups. And so tier 2 focuses on using non-punitive responses to harm or conflict or to respond to disciplinary issues in a restorative manner. And so tier 3 is on an individualized level, and it's used to provide one-on-one guidance to support the re-entry of youth following suspension, truancy, or expulsion. And so, yeah, next slide. And so we also want to turn our attention to the necessity of culturally responsive practices and community schooling and wraparound services as being a part of our vision for MTSS. On one hand, in FUSD, there is a cultural mismatch between the embodied values of how FUSD runs its schools and Fremont's communities of color. And so all of these things listed on this slide are just ways that we can like be more responsive towards the various cultures within our school district. And so now we'll be passing it on to Alvin for some of the recommendations that we've put together for implementing these sorts of recommendations into our district.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, Kenny. The first one is hiring staff and training. Just to give some background, there are many initiatives that support student mental health that have been put in place already. All of our 5 high schools are going to have wellness centers. Most of our secondary sites have the Youth and Family Service Healthy Choice interns, as well as their school counselors. A lot of our school sites like Mission and Washington have Peer Resource. There's late start days, stress days, etc. On the 12-16 board meeting, the hiring of additional school psychologists were also approved, so bringing the total up to 32. But as great as these initiatives are, there needs to be more consistency really at the district level to ensure that every student at every site has access to the supports they need. So the first one is hiring staff/training. So the district should hire staff to gradually meet the professionally recommended ratios for counselors, school psychologists, nurses, behaviorists, speech language pathologists, social workers, paraprofessionals, and negotiate new bargaining agreements based on the required ratios. And they should also actively recruit a diverse pool of staff from historically Black college universities, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, and Hispanic serving institutions. All FUSD personnel, especially mental health professionals, should also receive training in cultural competency. All mental health professionals and administrators should also receive 12 to 14 hours of training from the Crisis Prevention Institute, and this training should become mandated for all school site administrators. Step 2 is building healthy school frameworks for supporting mental health. So that includes developing a district-wide plan for proper implementation of the following frameworks with progress monitoring and data-based instructional decisions. This piece is really crucial. The implementation plan should really be based on the California Department of Education guidelines. So it's broken down into 3. For academic, we have evidence-based dyslexia intervention and UDL. For behavioral, we have culturally responsive intervention systems and trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive support. And then for social emotional, we have restorative practices, restorative justice, SEL, as well as cultural responsiveness and building community schools. Step 3 is student, parent, and community engagement, which is a piece that isn't really emphasized enough when it comes to the topic of mental health. This is particularly important to FUSD since a lot of our parents are first-generation immigrants, and if there are some countries like where my parents are from in Hunan, China, where mental health is a lot more stigmatized. So implementing student education initiatives for all K-12 students at all school sites, this would include year-round education on mental health awareness and healthy coping strategies, SEL curriculum, peer counseling and conflict resolution training amongst students, cultural competency and cultural humility training for students. It will also mean on-site and virtual wellness centers for junior high, middle, and high schools in each attendance area, as well as furthering expanding partnerships with local and regional mental health agencies to broaden support for all students. The final piece is implementing parent and community education initiatives that are accessible to English as a second language speakers. So this would include bicultural parenting workshops, and more critically, workshops that really focus on destigmatizing mental health. It's also really important to make mental health literacy more accessible to ESL speakers. Mental health information should also be posted online and available in the following languages: Spanish, Hindi, Mandarin, Tagalog, etc. The mental health literacy piece piece and the accessibility piece is also very critical as well, because I've had a lot of personal experiences, where students will talk about a lot of different things and terms, and they'll just fly over the parents' heads, right? So I know this was a bit rushed. Apologies about that. We were trying to keep it within the 10-minute mark. A lot of information here. But yeah, that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alvin. Okay, so since you all have the link to the presentation, then I'm going to let Alvin kind of have it down and not share screen so that I can do questions and see you all a little bit better. Michael.
First, I want to compliment you on an excellent job. Well done. You should be really proud of what you did. But I would ask, if you were to condense all of that into one recommendation, like if we were only going to do one thing, what is it that you would recommend that we did?
That's a that's a great question. I think there's a lot of things in here that we really would love you to do. Maybe you could turn it into like a big bill package and sell it as a huge reform bill. And I'm joking, but I would say that I think in a conversation recently with the superintendent and Mrs. Salinas, you all mentioned that you're already using the expanded learning opportunity grants to implement MTSS, right?
No. Well, and thank you. This was really a good way to contextualize. So we did meet last week, and so we also have a CCSA plan, and the CCSA plan is out of the recommendation out of special education.
Okay.
And so we are already looking at the rollout for MTSS as a district for next year, but knowing that we also have to temper our work, because it's not about starting a whole bunch of new initiatives. It's about supporting the re-entry into school next year. So I think as we start to kind of build that plan, we do see aspects that we will definitely be working on next year as a district. Absolutely.
We do use not ELOG, Alvin, but some of the LCAAC funds. We have received presentations on, for example, PBIS for the elementary, the positive behavioral systems. So that sort of thing that is part of MTSS, we do fund currently through LCAAC. So we are definitely putting some money towards that within our existing plan.
Okay, gotcha. And just to clarify, Mrs. Salinas, in the CCEIS plan that was introduced to the district, I think at the time it was primarily elementary and middle school sites. Would it also be expanded to high school sites as well in the current version y'all are working on?
No, not on the current version. But that's really the work that we're doing with our team, and that'll be the next step. So yeah. And I back to what Ms. Berber Carrera said, absolutely. We do have behavioral MTSS that has started in some schools with PBIS, and that's funded out of the LCAP.
Okay. All right, excellent. Ivy.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm pretty impressed. I mean, for young people to understand the importance of mental health and the support, mental counseling and all that. I'm just curious as to where did you get all this information? How, where do you, because you mentioned, somebody mentioned there was a link to your presentation. I don't think I have the link to the presentation. If we can get that too.
Ivy, I had put the link to the presentation is just in the chat right now, and then that'll be linked also into the minutes too.
Okay,
so yeah. Do you mean the data, Ivy, or do you mean the specifically the data on the mental health, or?
Well, just the overall presentation, I think is very comprehensive. But I think this information, I'm hearing it for the first time. So it's, so I'm curious. I like to look more into it, but I'm very curious as to where you get the information, because they seem very professional. So I don't know if you work with professionals or you do your own surveys, or how do you come up with the presentation?
So we actually have.
You go for it, Kenneth.
So yeah, we have a document of that's not a slideshow, and it's just a document that just lists out all the recommendations, and attached to each one there's footnotes saying where we got the statistic from, or which organization we work with to gather that information. And so we can share that as well if.
Okay. So you work on, so you have a team on, the GenUp is made up of a team of students, and you all work in different aspects and you contact different sources and you put together the presentation. Is that
Yeah, so we're working with mental health professionals for.
Okay, that's great. And then when you mentioned that, like your recommendation to hire staff and training, do you also have you done the cost analysis or something on that? I mean,
that'll be the portion, yeah, Ivy. So that'll be the portion that we look at, and that'll be incorporated onto our spreadsheet. And I'll give you some numbers that we've gotten from business. Because yeah, so similar to kind of Greg, you know, they're saying kind of these are what they think the needs are, and here is it. You know, it could be like Greg said, more pie in the sky. But when we do have the funding, you know, whatever the length of time, we want to make sure that we can capture that and utilize it in a way that might not get everything that we know that we would want to do for students. But yes, we'll have some approximations for what the costs will be.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
And then just one other thing, the district's getting over 20 million, but that's for the whole expanded learning opportunity grant, right? This committee could make recommendations that are just a couple million. We could make recommendations for 40 million. You know, it's whatever. We don't want to get too, you know, we've got 38 minutes left, but we want to make sure that kind of for what we've delved into for within our scope, that we can put forward some recommendations. But because we obviously don't have $20 million of recommendations, it's not so critical that we get caught up on the, well, this is $1,000 versus it's $1,100, or this is even $100,000 versus $120,000. That's not going to be the really big the sticking point for this committee. Our recommendations would go kind of up the chain, and then the business office would really run those numbers and help the school board put together what they think the final approvals are.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and explanation. Thank you.
Excellent.
And Michael, just to answer your question real quick, because I don't think we ever answer that. It's broken down into 4 steps. So ideally, we'd like to start with step 1, and then it kind of goes in terms of cost. So obviously, hiring staff and training would be the most expensive ones, and then the later ones, kind of like step 3, that focus more on that student, parent, and community engagement. Obviously, on a lot less cost-heavy side.
Right. I really apologize, but I have to hop off for another meeting now. So it was nice talking to all of you, and so thank you for listening to.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Lorona.
So my question is, I'm interested. I heard you guys. I like the presentation. Everything is very good. But my question to you guys: what about for temporary mental health issues dealing with kids that may suffer from grief? Short-term grief and handling that, because I don't, a lot of people, a lot of kids deal with like grandparents passing away, and then, for a short amount of time, they might be, have a lot of anger built up, parents passing away, or, just any type of things like that to deal with, temporary stress and temporary grief for that moment. And then we have some kids that might, we don't know their situation or circumstances. They might have to go to an emergency foster home for temporary, and they don't know how to deal with that. So what type of help do you guys have for that type of need?
Yeah. I think what's also really important is just having a lot of the necessary mental health infrastructure in place for students to understand which resources they should actively seek in those times. I think a lot of times, for example, whenever students have something on their shoulders, right, they have to get off their chest, particularly things that are temporary stressors. A lot of times they turn to school counselors, school site counselors as their first stop option. But the issue is that they're very overburdened. They have huge caseloads. They have so many other things to deal with. So oftentimes they're not receiving the complete attention they could, versus if there are more staff hired, and also just peer counseling and that kind of peer-to-peer support is also really great for that. And another piece of it is just cultural competency training and kind of those restorative practices. And when we talk about SEL learning curriculum for students on site as well, that's really important too, right? Teaching students healthy coping strategies and providing them with the necessary information to really understand and tackle the different emotions or mental health triggers they may be feeling at that time.
Okay, and do you guys also suggest to have like peers their age to also be like an influencer in a positive way? Because sometimes you have kids that don't necessarily turn to their parents and don't necessarily turn to a social worker or other thing, and you know they lean towards their peers. So do you also like make it easy for like kids to influence other kids to become like a positive role model and to help with mental health as well? Will you have some type of volunteers for that?
Yeah, so as part of our step 3, our student, parent, and community engagement plan, one of our kind of year-round student education initiatives that we actually want for all K through 12 students at all school sites does include peer counseling and conflict resolution training for students. So that would be providing that necessary I guess training, if you want, for students. I don't know if that sounds very like they're getting hired for a job, but that kind of necessary training among peers for them to be strong supporters of each other in times of need.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions, Lorna, because I think too, there's a few things. The broad socio-emotional learning curriculum is something that would be kind of the base level. But then what you're asking about and Alvin's explaining is kind of like the additional training to and learning, which allows students to not only have their own socio-emotional kind of regulation and working through, but also then helps them be a resource for other students around them. And then in general, the trauma-informed practices was in there as well. And so yes, Lorona, you're absolutely right. Coming through this pandemic, trauma happens all the time, but we're definitely looking even more at trauma and what can we do to up-train, people that are there on campus welcoming our students back to be aware. All right, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jenna. Well researched. I'd suggest in step 2 that you expand some of the definition to include additional classified personnel, particularly at the school sites. Many families, their first interaction is with a classified employee, such as an administrative assistant, a school secretary, something like that. An example of the kind of training that we have the opportunity to take and many have participated in is something that Mr. Bailey's office offered, and I believe it was free, which was youth mental health first aid. Exceptionally valuable training. Kids come to the office for first aid, so we can do a Band-Aid and we can also do a Band-Aid. So I would encourage Jen up to look into the volume of students that clerical employees see in a normal world day, because that's often where the information gathering and referrals happen. But excellent presentation, and thank you, Mr. Bailey. The youth mental health first aid training is awesome, so thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and definitely, Alvin, if he, taking this elsewhere, like you said, putting it forward to a bill, he could tweak it, but remember, it's in this committee's purview to make whatever kind of recommendations that we want, which absolutely, when you make that recommendation, could add in some of that training that makes sure it's for all staff, and in that capacity. Steve.
Sorry, wrong button. Thank you very much. You guys did a wonderful presentation there. What I kind of, something struck me is I've sat through obviously a lot of presentations on this topic and the nature of my job, but I thought the universal design for learning illusion, and it's not something that I think we've talked a lot about, whether in this committee or in a lot of the presentations surrounding mental health. And it's something I'd be interested in talking and exploring further for our district, but it is a very large project. I was wondering if you had any thoughts you could share with us, share, especially the members of the committee who are what UDL is and how it could have an impact on mental health.
Okay, I'm gonna share a small, or okay, I guess I could read it out loud, but in K-12 settings, special education becomes the grounds. This is very long, actually. I know we're pressed for time. I'm going to drop the link in the chat so everyone can refer to it afterwards. 1 second.
And while Alvin's doing that, to kind of give a little bit of context as well to the UDL, we've talked about this a little bit, which is that the idea of assisting students with special needs on certain things and making sure that we're inclusive completely also helps in targeting specifically our unduplicated students. So a lot of the ways that we might reach out and make those additional efforts to be inclusive also helps in this way for unduplicated. So thank you for that. Oops, yeah, okay.
Long paragraphs there. The slide I'm referring to in terms of the cartoon, if you refer back to the LCAAC presentation, is slide number 10.
All right, Ivy and Lorona, I think that we got you on this. So unless you unmute, I'm gonna think that we're ready to. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a follow-up question, Lorena?
I want to.
Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Alvin, and thank Kenny for us as well. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time. And we're going to go ahead now and move on to our approvals. So have a great night.
Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you so much for having me. And once again, apologies about the difficulties and all over the place. I've never really used Google Meets before. So this was the first time. I was very confused. I could not see my face while I was presenting as well as I was, it was a new world. So I'm sorry about that.
All right. Okay. So with that, I'm going to have Steve go over very briefly that he did what we wanted last time. So I want to definitely give him a few minutes because we wanted to be able to have the ability to hone in the input that we received from the survey and actually do a comparison, because it's hard to tell if 50% of people feel a certain way. We read that differently if 49% of people felt that way for the last 3 years in a row, or if 22% of people felt that way, right? Looking backwards. So that's kind of a way that we can monitor ongoing. So you have that linked in your agenda. Steve, I don't know if whatever works for you to either screen share or just kind of give an overview so folks know what they're looking at.
Sure. People have the link so they can look at that. This was more work than I thought it would be because we had to make the data a little more consistent from year to year. That being said, I'm really happy that we have this because it'll be easy to add to in the future. What we have here is you have a look that you can go back to 2018. These surveys started in 2017, but the format of the questions were different so that we couldn't really include it in here. But the sense in the last few years has been pretty consistent. If you're looking at question number 2 here at the top, under 2020, 2019, it says Q5. What this means is that in the survey in 2020, that was question number 5, not question number 2. And there were, I think, 2 questions on here that did not have a comparison in this year's survey. And those are the questions, 17 and 18. Those were kind of related to distance learning. No, I guess they weren't necessarily related to distance learning. We didn't have questions that were equivalent to those. That being said, I was not able to do the line graphs. I kind of ran out of time. Sorry about that, Michael. But we wanted to get these posted by an early enough time. And if a graphic representation is what the committee needs, we can do that. But at least now you can look across and see for the last 4 years how a question was answered in all 5 categories. So I think that's about it. I can happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Steve. I have Crystal.
Hi, my question was from a while ago, but I think it's still relevant. And the presentation, which was great, touched on this a little bit. I'm just wondering, what's the current caseload for the social workers that we do have? And then how does that compare to where we're trying to get to?
We don't currently have any social workers at the moment.
Or counselors, excuse me. Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Bailey's there.
Greg has
Yeah.
the first, right?
Counselors, we have 14 elementary counselors, and they're either at the school site 3 days a week or 2 days a week, depending on the, actually Title I schools years ago got the 3 days a week, and then the remaining schools got 2 days a week. Our secondary sites, it varies anywhere from, I think, 2 to 4.5 based on student enrollment. But I can tell you their overall ratio, I have it down somewhere. It's quite a bit off of the recommended ratio from the state, which I believe is 250 to 1. We're at least double that as a district. I could tell you that.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Crystal. Let's see. Ivy?
Thank you so much, Steve, for the hard work. But I think if you're going to go off using the same chart, maybe you want to correct something, because I was looking at the 2018 and 2019, all the percentages are the same. The percentages for both years are the same. Yeah, so the numbers, but the percentages are the same. So
Particular questions?
all of them pretty much. Like if you look at number 2, right? You look at 19 and 18, right? Strongly agree. Yeah, and
You know what?
Yeah.
I see that. I see what you're saying right now. So there
Right.
must be something wrong with our table, our Excel, because this comes from an Excel table we built. So
Yeah.
that's embarrassing, and I apologize for that. We'll
Yeah.
correct that.
It's really difficult because I was trying to get all the numbers into my spreadsheet, but it's a lot of work. I applaud you for even take on this effort to do this.
No,
Yeah, but then when I was looking at question number 15, because that was a question I had last time, I had a lot of don't know. And then comparing it to the other years, okay, question 15, right? I mean, if you look at 2021, this don't know is 51.14% for 2021. But then for 2020, it's 17.61. 2019, 18.92. 2018 is 18.92. So basically, there's a huge difference. I'm just wondering if that's due to COVID. That's why you have that number.
my suspicion it's due to two things. COVID, absolutely. 51% is a pretty significant jump.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, if you recall, there was a bullying was a real priority. I wanted to say about 2015 through 2018. It was something that we had publicized a great deal more centrally than we have in more recent years. So I wouldn't be surprised if awareness was increased by that.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's all the questions I have.
I would just add on that one of the things to notice, though, is that the disagree and strongly disagree hasn't changed. And so the people who are feeling that bullying isn't a problem has remained within 1 and 2 percentage points.
All right, let's see. Lorona, did you have something on this one?
No, she answered. It was pretty clear.
All right, excellent. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead then if there's nothing else on the survey. And we're now going to go into the linked document for the LCAAP. And I can walk through kind of how it's chunked. Oops, I see Divya. Divya, I don't want to move on to the next agenda item here if your question is for Steve.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I actually wanted to speak regarding the number of responses that we received compared to the previous years. Of course, it did increase, maybe given to COVID, but most of the questions I see that the number at strongly agree has reduced. So I just wanted to highlight that and see what we are going to do about that, right? I mean, of course, it may be because of the number of responses which have increased, but the way that the parents are perceiving some of the questions, I mean, some of the things that these questions are addressing also would have been an impact, right? So are we doing something about that?
Steve, I'm not sure if, because we had kind of, I know, and we asked so much work of you last time, and it's only been 2 weeks, but we had also kind of talked about maybe if there were a couple big kind of themes that you thought from the data that you were looking at, which might get to kind of Divya's question, but completely understandable because this is a really quick turnaround from our last meeting.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to share. I actually think that at the last meeting, the input from the roadshow, the presentations we did, I think there's actually a lot of actionable data within that, and I'll go back to saying that if there's one conclusion I have, it's counselors are very popular. So it fits thematically with what we've talked about here. The other thing would be information, similar to the presentation from the students just gave us from GenUp. The informational sessions are always something that polls well. Now, sometimes you get into the thing where it polls well, but not necessarily attended well. But it is definitely an expressed community need is more informational sessions, and doing so on a variety of topics, both related to school and related to, at these ages.
Thank you, Steve. All right, so the only hands I see up are all ones that I did just call on for this item. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm looking at the working document for the 2021-22 LCAAP. And I'm not going item by item this time. I'm going to actually go by color. So let me explain there. So first, I'll go with the orange. So both 2.5 and 3.10, those were ones that we had discussed previously needing to look into, particularly 2.5. There was a really large discrepancy over what had originally been budgeted for and then what the adjusted budget had been. So we needed to look into that. And they were ultimately used for pass-through library funds, which, as we've discussed before, when this committee has offered the recommendations and the school board has approved it, but there still are a significant amount of funds that have gone unspent. District staff then uses that money to accomplish goals that are still within LCAAP, and they might change the designated amounts. So we have this now back at $95,000, which is actually what the original allocation was in that area. It was not 1.5 million. So that's kind of reset. And then for the orange 3.10, we talked about this previously, and Michael shared a little bit since he is a special educator. What we did is align the percentage of the services that we are funding for students with special needs and the intersectionality of our unduplicated students, which is noted to be 19%. So like we've done before, where we're funding a certain percentage of an area in the district, we don't want to overfund something. As Michael pointed out, our students with special needs are guaranteed services. So we don't want to say we're going to just put all of the money from LCAAP, right, or an inappropriate amount of money that doesn't match up with what we believe the percentage is. So this is reset now at 1.3 million, which is approximately 19% of psychologists, which is something that our committee has said we think is a good use of that money, is funding the psychologists. And then 2 out of 8, which is approximately, right? It's as close as we can get to that 19%, but for program specialists, so who head up some of that work in the special education department. But that's now, that's changed now from where we were funding it before, which was a higher percentage, but didn't match with the unduplicated. So those are just a couple, those are the orange. So if you have questions about either of those categories that we had said we were going to look into, now would be the time if we wanted to talk about those.
Just for the notes, orange represents a decrease in funding.
It is a reset. It is something that the committee had discussed that we were going to look into. So this is what we're recommending based on the committee's ask of go back and look into, go look into it a little bit more. But they do both end up being a decrease in funding, but only for the purposes of alignment. Okay. All right. So then I'm going to point out to you, but we're not going to spend time talking about it, but this is for future reference. Both the yellow 4.1 and 4.3, the committee said we wanted to talk more about. We wanted to look more into hearing about what the district is doing for that, but we didn't have anything where we said we wanted to change the amount of funding. We just, for our own information, wanted to hear more about it. But since we're so packed today, we did not agendize presentations on those, but I left those highlighted in yellow so that we can go back to them at a later date. So if that's okay, we're going to move on and just kind of pin that.
Can I?
Letty.
Yes, and so I think though, weren't we also, is that where we're looking at the counselors or the climate and the professional development, the PBIS?
No, 4.1 and 4.3 are under goal 4 for the partnerships with families and community.
Mm-hmm.
So those two were not, well, you know what? I put them in a different area. We could decide, and I think for funding purposes, it's if district staff thinks that it should be more appropriate in 4.1, but I had put it in 3.2 maybe for some of the additional staffing. But on your end, because you know much more of the technical, so you and Steve might work that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. But for our purposes, I think we'll be agreed if we allocate certain money for a certain purpose, but you guys decide to put it under a different goal and action because more technically it fits there. I don't think that the committee would have objection to that.
Right, and I think that would be a good recommendation. I also would want some time to tap this on with Greg as well, because I think that's where we're looking at the restorative practices, what we heard from the students and what we heard from parents. We've gotten some direction there as well.
Okay, great. And then separately, the teal 3.1 was regarding AVID, which we had said due to the way that secondary staffing and course offerings work, that it wouldn't be perhaps in the best interest for us to make any adjustments for this upcoming year. But that's also some information that this committee wanted to hear about, which was on AVID, so that we do want to have that noted, so that if that's something that we look to receive a presentation for in the future, but we're not changing the current zero allocation for next school year. Okay, any questions on any of those colors before we go to the green? Because those are the kind of meatier areas. Michael?
Well, it has to do with the Gen Up presentation, because both the yellow and the green items are a lot of the things that they discussed.
Yeah, so let's do the green, and then we can make notes for sure if we think that it belongs in the yellow, like Letty was saying. Let's go ahead and add those things in there. Absolutely. Right. I'll just clarify. So they were yellow because we wanted to hear what the district was already doing. It doesn't mean that we can't add more money into it now based on what we've heard, but I marked them as yellow because we had said we wanted to know what the district was doing, but we weren't going to do a presentation tonight on that.
Right. And some of them may already have staffing in there. So for example, some of Greg's team might be in the yellow. Yeah.
Okay. All right, excellent. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start at 1.7. So this is on professional development, and so we had talked about considering an increase. So the only thing right now, which I did do what Ivy had asked last time, which is make sure we have totals down at the bottom, so then we can kind of see where things are and we know what money we can, what amount of money we can look to increase, which is almost $2 million. But then if we have other things we want to use for more of an infusion, we could recommend that for ELOG. So while I put recommendations for ELOG on the next agenda item, it's okay if we're talking about that now as well, because we might just say that could be something that we just recommend for ELOG, and then we'll kind of two birds, one stone there. So for 1.7, because the committee said we were going to be considering an increase, and as Letty discussed, the spending on professional development went down quite a bit in distance learning for the difficulties that we've talked about. So right now, I just restored that to what the 2019-20 allocation was, which was $295,000. But if there are specific things that we wanted to make as recommendations, now would be a good time. So Michael had just talked about restorative practices. So if we want to actually list some things, this would be a good time to do so. Michael?
Yeah, I want to talk about the restorative justice training and think that it's something that's important enough that it shouldn't be simply a voluntary after school kind of training, but a paid thing where we pay for subs. So the day of school, students would have subs, or it would be a planned day off. And the teachers would all be trained, because one of the things I know that a struggle with restorative justice is that if you get a couple of teachers who don't really need training on restorative justice, they'll go to it because they're passionate about it. And then teachers who are skeptical and don't understand the system won't go to it. And so I think it's really important that if we're going to really invest in restorative justice, it should be something that all teachers are going to, and it be a part of either the beginning year training or sometime in the middle year where it's just a staff day, and so that all staff has an opportunity to go.
Okay, so a couple things there. Unless, Steve, did you have something also on restorative practices?
I did not. It's a separate topic.
Okay, so so Michael's brought up a couple different things. We can recommend, if the approximate cost for an all staff, all day training is upwards of $500,000. So that's not to say we can't recommend that. We can also allocate maybe a couple $100,000 so that at least one of the 3 staff development days that we have, that staff could go, they could use it either as their incorporated part of their work year, but also if they've utilized those days already, they could get paid. So for a smaller dollar amount, we could say something like $100,000. Those are kind of some of the options we have for that. So I'll just put that out there. Anything else on professional development? Steve?
It's not professional development. I'm sorry if I'm raising my hand at the wrong point. It's actually related to 2.1.
Okay.
There was a call to arms. You said, if you got an idea, bring it now.
Oh.
So I jumped right in. So.
Sorry, thank you. I will definitely take you. We're just on 1.7, but then we'll go to your thing, especially since you're the one, I'm sure, who has the invoice for that system. So we want to make sure we get the correct amount for that. So is there any opposition to increasing that amount to by $200,000, let's say, so that it's $500,000 instead of $295,000, and we list restorative practices and trauma-informed practices for all staff as part of their workday if they sign up for that. And you just raised your hand. I'm going to go to you because you had spoken about making sure everyone gets training that needs it and wants it.
Yes, I just would like a clarification then when you're saying all staff, it's all staff. It's not all certificated staff. So if it could be spelled out in the minutes, I think that would help our administrators who are forming other plans and things, because that really changes what might be happening. In my head anyway. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I would just like to speak on that.
Yeah.
I just want to back that up, that it's very important that, because what restorative justice needs to do is to change the entire culture. And so CSTs, secretaries, all being on the same page and understanding the system, even if they're not directly implementing it, knowing what's going on. Because when there's confusion about it, it can look like, oh, well, nothing happened to that kid, even though they did X, Y, and Z, because they don't understand how the system works. So making sure that all the staff, anyone that works with students, understands the system, because if you don't, what ends up happening, people who are confused and then will undermine the system by using old models or saying what they don't understand, saying, oh, that's not working. And so keep making sure that everyone understands what we're doing and is helping making it happen, I believe is the only way for that to actually be effective. Otherwise, you're just kind of patting yourself on the back and saying, some people did restorative justice, isn't that nice? But actually changing the actual way our system works.
Okay. The only other note, because then we do have a queue, because I want to address a couple things. So I'm going to clarify the 200,000 I would recommend to be an E-log recommendation, because that's a one-time thing that we could again build some positive momentum and get a significant number of people trained for that. But I also want to be mindful that it is almost 8 o'clock, so I'm going to actually defer to Letty, because I need to know the date by which we have to get this recommendation in, because I'm seeing that probably it will take us another, I'm going to say 30 to 40 minutes probably to get through this. I don't want to undercut the amount of time, because we haven't even, got to counselor social, we want to kind of be mindful of that. And so I want to see if Letty, is there time if we wanted to reschedule another meeting for an hour in the next week, or did we want to push through?
Yeah, I think, and I'm gonna let Steve think about it. We've got a lot of stuff coming in the queue. So two things. The first is, my understanding was we were just gonna look at those areas that we were gonna revisit. We're not unpacking the whole thing again, because the committee said, let's go forward, right? Okay, and two, absolutely, I can take recommendations for E-log, but remember, I'm still getting district-wide input with a survey that's out there right now. This is just one group that will give input. So although we may say it here, it's not a necessarily will happen. So kind of have that context as well. But knowing that as staff, I will definitely use my eye to use the short-term needs with the short-term money will go first, the most restricted, right? What do you think, Steve? Do you think, because we're on a tight timeline ourselves.
Yeah, I'm fine with either way. We are, I think we have our meeting with the first meeting with ACOE 2 weeks from now. And that's when we have to give the pretty comprehensive outline. So, we do have some time, but it is pretty limited. So if we're going to do another meeting, it probably have to be sooner than later.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would have to look at next week. Would probably be the meeting. And if it's an hour, that would be, and we have a board meeting. We have a lot of evening meetings next week. So I'm looking at maybe Thursday the 6th is a possibility for me.
So,
or Friday. Well, no, not Friday. Sorry.
So does Monday, I look to Monday first, Letty, because we've been doing Mondays. Is anyone, could we do 7 o'clock on Monday?
Monday is technology advisory.
Yeah, and I've got DLAC and we've got a lot. It would have to be much earlier in the day, like at 3:30. And I know people work, or 4 o'clock, maybe 4 o'clock we could possibly do. No.
4 o'clock sound about right.
Yeah.
So people are still saying no.
Oh, no.
No.
Okay.
4:30.
Or 5.
5.
I could do a half an hour. If we could do a half an hour at 5 o'clock on that Monday.
But then maybe pushing other people. Do we have another day that has more availability?
Yeah. So what about Tuesday at 7 o'clock, Lucky, the 4th?
I have a personal commitment, but I could do earlier on that Tuesday at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, 5:30.
5 or 5:30. Is that a no? Okay.
Or 6.
I could do 5 or 5:30 on Tuesday.
Looks like Anne's not available.
And no. Okay. Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that possibility. I'm not sure if we'll get everyone maybe available, but we're going to try first.
I'm sorry. I need to excuse myself and just asking
Yeah.
Alicia or Victoria, do you have the notes?
Yes, thank you. And I think all we'll be adding to it is the date that we're scheduling again. So you've gotten us to the end here, Michael. Thank you so much.
Right. No problem. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.
Victoria, a suggestion would be to try to set the meeting where Letty can be there, and so that you can have a quorum.
Yes, so I think, and that's why if we can't get something that no one says no to, we're going to come back to Tuesday at 5, because you might be the only person who said they can't do it that time. But if otherwise we can pick something where everyone is available, and that's what we'll do.
For me, I'm not available before 5, just because of my work commitments.
Right, but you could do 5 o'clock. Okay. All right. What about third? I would use my discretion. I can schedule in between 2 other FUDTA meetings. Thursday the 6th, I could do 5 o'clock if that works for people.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay. I see no no's, so we're gonna go to Thursday the 6th. Thursday the 6th at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to pick back up with this, and as Letty said, we're only really highlighting, I shouldn't say we're only really, we are only going over the ones that are highlighted in green, or if something already fits into that theme, but you think it might get added into a different line item better, but we're not reopening all of them. We're only going over those few, and then hopefully we can get that done quickly. Okay. All right. So that's our single agenda item then for the 6th at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. So we'll add that on to the notes and say that that's an upcoming meeting as well. And we are then adjourned at 8:03. Thank you all so much.
All right. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.